Dr. Glenn Bembry, who all spearheaded the development of this project. I'll speak a little today about what is trauma, some types of trauma responses, and who is most vulnerable to serious stress reactions. This can lay the foundation for listening to and exploring our 4 weeks of talks and discussions. Uh, on March 24th, the series will conclude, moving from discussion of individual, interpersonal, social responses to stress to consideration of the notion of resilience and how we can promote it in ourselves and others. So, what is trauma? We have a lot of ideas about trauma. Um, and we think usually of trauma as something that happens that is catastrophic. But how and when does trauma occur? It can occur at any time. Perhaps most devastatingly, in an overwhelming experience in everyday life. We have no problem recognizing that being in a five-car collision is likely traumatic. But what about a child who is chronically bullied, or the husband whose wife suddenly leaves him for another love, or the grief many of us have experienced this past year with loss, fear, and isolation? All of those are stress situations that could be trauma. Trauma actually is the onset of conditions that threaten one's life, well-being, and sense of self. That's the first thing, they threaten one's life. Second, it seems as though the situation is out of one's control. Third, these conditions occur, they're unpredictable, even if they're repetitive. So if you are a chronically abused child, for example, uh, you may anticipate that there's going to be more mistreatment, but you don't know when it's going to happen. So it continues that sense of the unpredictability of when something awful is going to occur. And the fourth thing is there was nothing that the person could do to prevent the circumstance from happening. So it's one, threatening one's life and your sense of centeredness. Two, it seems out of one's control. I'm hearing snow falling, sorry. I mean, off the roof. Three are unpredicted. The circumstances are unpredicted, even if repetitive. And four, there's nothing that you can do about it. Can't prevent it from happening. So you have a sense of powerlessness. There are two types of trauma in a general sense. And the first is physical. Physical trauma includes what can happen when there's a serious injury, accident, medical illness. So it's physical trauma. And that's the body's response that Dr. Massaro is going to talk about today to, to the trauma of either everyday life or overwhelming circumstances that are catastrophic. Mental trauma includes frightening thoughts and painful feelings. They are the mind's response to serious injury. Mental trauma, which can be either environmental or physical. Mental trauma can produce strong feelings that derail our way of thinking and feeling. It can also produce extreme behavior, such as intense fear or helplessness, withdrawal or detachment, lack of concentration, irritability. These are signs when you're with somebody and you see there's something off, to try to understand that they may be having a stress reaction, even though you don't know that they've been in a traumatic situation, because I'll speak about that in a minute. So withdrawal or detachment, lack of concentration, irritability, sleep disturbance, nightmares, aggression, hypervigilance, scanning the environment all the time for something awful to happen, uh, or flashbacks, nightmares, repetitive reliving of the events that triggered this stress reaction. Another response could be continuous feelings of fear. It's believed that the more direct exposures to stressful events cause greater harm. Research indicates that if an event that's experienced as traumatic is initiated by another person, then it is more likely to produce serious stress responses than something that is environmentally triggered. So if you're mugged, for example, it's more likely that that would have a serious stress reaction in a person who may be vulnerable than being stuck in a hurricane, or being a lightning storm strikes your house, because that's outside of personal control. And when somebody, another person, instigates a situation that could be experienced as traumatic, it feels more like it's directed against you, and that causes more serious stress reactions. Um, Also, for instance, in a school shooting, an injured student who will be more seriously affected emotionally than a student who is in another part of the building. And that second student might experience what we'll talk about as vicarious trauma. Uh, they will know about it, hear about it. They were part of the experience. If you think about what happened in the Capitol building in January, for example, that some people were directly in the line of assault, and others heard about it or could hear the noise but were locked behind doors. Those, of course, it just stands to reason, who were right in the front line would be more likely to have a serious stress reaction. And we've heard lots about those who are in that um, situation. So, as I mentioned, what is traumatic for one person may simply be uncomfortable for another, or difficult for another. We think of trauma as catastrophic, um, but it can take many faces. Today, people think immediately of PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, when we mention trauma reactions. But that is the least likely thing to occur when someone is faced with a traumatic situation. Uh, a serious stress disorder, PTSD, impacts about less than 10% of those who experience the same traumatic event. So we're not really vulnerable as a population to severe disorders in the face of traumatic events. We tend to be able to adapt, whether we have healthy adaptational defenses or weak ones. We still tend to be able to regroup and get back. Um, and as I mentioned, the most dangerous of stressful conditions occur in situations we refer to as overwhelming experiences of everyday life. So, have you ever, someone close to you, been exposed to sudden, unexpected, life threatening, or overwhelming events? This could be the result of surgery, accident, illness, financial crisis, family or marital crises, loss, danger, natural or environmental disaster, such as the current pandemic. Um, Traumatic stress has many faces, but as I said, responses to them can be mastered and transformed with emotionally resilient problem solving patterns if we recognize that the individual or the group may be having a stress response. We can recognize that, and there are interventions, we'll talk about them later in the series, to help people. And Dr. Massaro, will talk about some today, with, I'm sure. Um, the Some types of trauma, just mentioned quickly, are traumatic grief, um, or complicated mourning, where both trauma and grief coincide. If a traumatic event was only life threatening, then more likely the survivor will experience some stress symptoms. If the survivor was close to the person who died, then more likely symptoms of grief will also develop. So this becomes complicated mourning. And when the death is of a loved one and was sudden or violent, then both symptoms coincide. This is likely to happen in children exposed to community violence. And then childhood trauma, including abuse and neglect, is probably the single most important public health challenge in this country. A challenge that has the potential to be largely resolved by appropriate prevention and intervention. Each year, more than 3 million children are reported to the authorities for abuse or neglect in this country. About 1 million of those cases are substantiated. The vast majority of people, about 80%, responsible for child maltreatment are children's own parents. Uh, Another type of traumatic response occurs in the face of chronic trauma that interferes with your neurobiological development and the capacity to integrate these senses and emotional and cognitive information you need to move into adulthood. This developmental trauma sets the stage for unfocused and unreliable responses to subsequent stress. Um, so, who is most vulnerable to traumatic stress reactions? We all have our strengths and challenges. In addition to those individuals who are experiencing a direct personal impact from the event, there are those who may be particularly susceptible to physical and or psychological reactions to an event. These are people who are vulnerable. It's the people who are most susceptible to serious stress reactions are those vulnerable from previous traumatic life events, who are at risk because of recent ill health, who experience severe stress and loss, who have a diminished level or accessibility to social and emotional support, and who come into this situation lacking effective coping skills and adequate defense mechanisms. Those are the people who are more likely, that 10% I mentioned, to develop serious stress reactions and potential disorders. But a paradox of successful functioning is that in order to be centered and strong, you must be able to tolerate the full spectrum of emotional responses. You need to be able to feel weak, hopeless, frustrated, and all the rest in order to be strong. We in this country have not promoted that image and have done ourselves a real disservice. And that's why so many of us end up with various symptoms of stress reactions. What enables some people to cope better as time goes on with the unexpected is the resilience factor. And we'll talk about that later in this series. So I'd like to introduce now Dr. Mary Massaro. And I'll tell you, Dr. Mary Massaro is a certified psychoanalyst who uses a combination of uh, modern psychoanalytic uh, therapy, mind body integrative therapies, and self relations theory in her practice of clients of all ages. In addition to her private practice, Dr. Massaro has consulted for major corporations and school districts on wellness, stress management, trauma and resilience, and team effectiveness. A graduate of the renowned High School of Performing Arts in New York City, Dr. Massaro, who began her career as a dancer, choreographer, and director of a modern dance company, has maintained a long lived relationship with the performing arts community. Her master's degree in movement science created another opportunity to use art and science to assist others. Trained to integrate mind body strategies, Dr. Massaro expanded her therapeutic skills through years of study and clinical application, ultimately receiving professional psychoanalytic certification from ACAP, the Academy of Clinical and Applied Psychoanalysis, and a doctorate from the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis. Dr. Massaro is the past director of the multidisciplinary pain management program at St. Clair's Hospital in Denville and Boonton. She has also served as the director of graduate level institutes at Long Island University. So Dr. Massaro is a talented clinician and a gifted teacher, and I'd like to turn this session over to her now.
Hi there, everyone. I really thank you, Reverend Ann, Reverend John, and Dr. Bratt for inviting me to participate. And I'm really honored to be with you this evening presenting the first session in this series. Oh, sorry. Bear with me. I understand that this congregation is very forgiving. And so I am now doing the share screen, which is there and there and here and play. How's that?
There you go.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. I also want to say that Dr. Bratt's beautiful description, very thorough description of trauma is really the foundation of so much of the work that we do at ACAP. And I have this up here for you to take a look and see some of the ways in which we help our neighbors, our community, individuals, and different aspects of people needing help. And so we welcome you and invite you to come and visit us. We're in the process of reconstruction right now. And of course, COVID, we're not visiting anywhere, but keep us in mind. And when the doors open, our hearts are open as well. So I'm here this evening to talk to you about trauma and the body. And I wanted to share with you that I don't know if all of you are familiar, but in the groundbreaking book, therapist Risma Menachem. I mean, can somebody say that better? Anne, do you know the name? Risma Menachem. There we go. Okay, for a little Jewish girl in Brooklyn, I'm surprised I didn't have that pronunciation very well, but he examined in his really groundbreaking book called My Grandmother's Hands. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but if you're not, I'm highly recommending that you read it. He examined the damage caused by racism in America from the perspective of trauma and body-centered psychology. He argued that the body is where our instincts reside and where we fight, flee, or freeze. And it endures throughout our lifetime. The trauma is inflicted by the ills that plague society. So interestingly enough, what we're really looking at is the fact that the trauma gets into the body and it also gets into our genes. And new formulation of different kinds of research is now talking about epigenetics and the intergenerational aspect of trauma. So to understand that it is more than just us. We have our ancestors. We have the, as Rishma talked in the book, his grandmother's hands that told a story of years and years of trauma, picking cotton. And it really then demonstrated so beautifully how the way in which we hold the trauma in our bodies as she did. And so again, I'm highly recommending that book to you. let's look right now. Let's take a look at how everyday language expresses the mind-body connection. Oops. Need help, Matthew. That's great. Okay, we'll see what's going on. See, it's frozen. I love it. It's great. I'm going to smile and fluff my hair and think about what's going on here. Matthew, do you have any advice? Stop. You are sharing the screen. Let's see.
Yeah, maybe a stop share and try it again, Mary.
Okay, thank you, Anne.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
It's the equivalent of unplugging it and plugging it back in.
Yes.
Just about everything in life works better if we unplug for a while. So
Okay. Even my mouse stop. Even my mouse is misbehaving. Wait, we'll get it. We'll get it.
Matthew, are you there? Maybe can you stop the share, or I can stop the share?
I'm so sorry, folks. We really did rehearse this.
We did.
I don't know why this is happening.
Okay, you stopped the share. Now give it a try again.
Okay. Okay, escape. I'm there. Now I have to hit play, correct?
Yeah, you need to share the screen first, I think.
Okay, I'm doing it again, folks. And I'm doing this again. And I'm doing this again. And now I'm
There
going
we are.
to start the share. Okay,
Yep.
and
Then play.
And can you see me now?
Yep, we can see the slide.
Okay, and now here comes, thank you, everybody. I'm hoping that you're all taking very deep breaths. Okay. And my cat just came in to argue with me. Okay. So let's take a look at all the everyday language that expresses the way in which we are allowing ourselves to recognize how the body and the mind is so connected. So we're going to look at some of the metaphors of the body. And maybe some of you have even gone so far as heard these things or said these things aloud in your lifetime. So the body and mind has been connected. And here we are using metaphors to show that as an example. And we could see that we've all said these things at one point or another. Butterflies in my stomach. I love you from the bottom of my heart. Let's put our best foot forward. Don't tell anybody about that pain you got, you know. Your tongue in cheek. And somebody's got your leg, pulling your leg. Break a leg. And of course, we all know that we are filled with ways to describe our bodies, and we do it on a daily basis, putting your foot right in your mouth, like I had just done with the computer, I guess. So what we're really looking at now is how these early traumas, and I'm repeating some of the words that Dr. Bratt said earlier, that regardless of the source of the emotional trauma, it contains three common elements, and that is it's unexpected, we're unprepared for it, and we could not prevent it. The biopsychosocial model helps us to see how when we're triggered by past or present trauma, we're prone to default reactions, which are unconscious. These reactions are multifaceted, and it shows how we are touched by traumatic events. Our biology is definitely, and genetics now that we're understanding more and more, affect the body and the mind and the heart and the spirit. The trauma that occurs when we're physically injured, as Dr. Bratt was talking about, not only affects us physically, that we talk a lot in pain management about the anniversaries of particular times in a person's life that trigger, that can actually trigger the ways in which pain takes over our lives. Basically, absolutely, we become the pain. And it can be triggered by an anniversary of a person's having this unconscious, not even knowing that their bodies might be hurting all that much more because of a past trauma. And here it is the anniversary of the accident, and we don't even put the two things together. The anniversary of a death of someone, and all of a sudden your patient or my patient or your friends and family have migraines, and triggered by the ideas that the body and the mind are one, not to forget that. So the mental anguish that goes on, that needs to be nurtured, needs to be cared for. And then our emotional being, as Dr. Bratt talked about earlier, with being emotionally unbalanced. We just don't feel like we're in our own skin, so to speak. And this happens on this biopsychosocial modeling of understanding how the effects of the trauma are triggered. Socially, of course, we understand that when we're suffering from past trauma or present trauma, we could withdraw. We could find ourselves not reaching out. And the beauty of us all being together this evening is that socialization absolutely does calm, increase the serotonin, the oxytocin in our bodies, that we actually get connected in a way by being with others, even though we're on a Zoom screen. The fact that we have a shared mind, the fact that we are all together to repair and reach the places in our hearts that when we're alone becomes so much more difficult to do. When I talk about spirituality, I usually put together that with the word hope. And I think that that is really, to me, it doesn't matter the religion, it doesn't matter the ethnicity, it doesn't matter what, where, and how, but to be able to find the place of hope relaxes the body. It is an amazing feeling to just think. And, you know, the psalm that Reverend Rogers John spoke about today really touched me deeply. I was overwhelmed with the newness, though that was written, I don't know enough to say how many years ago, but how relevant these words are in today's world. So I want to show you some of the pioneers in the world of oh, my camera is off. Matthew just texted me that my camera was off. And I don't want that to be happening, but I have no idea how to put it back on. Are you watching me only, or can you also see me and my slides?
We can see the slides. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little picture of a camera.
Yeah.
It may be crossed out on your screen. I would just hit it again and hopefully you'll pop up again.
Okay, let's see.
And
Start my
start
video.
video would probably work. Perfect.
That. Thank you. Okay, maybe it was better that it was off for a while because I'm not suffering from trauma necessarily, I can tell you, but doing this is both a joy and at times traumatic for me. So thank you very much, Matthew, for sending me that message. I want to talk a little bit now about the pioneers. And that's another thing that's not happening.
Maybe the system is working when the video is off and you're sharing.
That's a possibility. Okay, let's try it again. Nothing's moving.
It's gotten stuck again. Ah,
Okay, folks. I'm very sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. Feel free to just share with us, Mary, without the visuals, if you think you can.
I most definitely can.
Yeah,
I can improvise easily. I just am annoyed, if you will.
yes, I understand.
Okay. Stop video.
Stop the,
Yeah,
stop
let's
the
see.
share. Yeah, you're back off the video again. We can't see
know.
your face. There you go.
Okay.
So if you start your video again, Matthew will spotlight you and you can just share
Oh,
with us.
look, how's that? Can you see this without me? Can you see the slide?
No,
Oh. I'm sorry.
But we can see you and that's better.
yeah.
Okay,
So go ahead and just keep going.
let's see. Can you see it now?
No, there's no screen being shared, according to,
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's see. I see me and you.
There you
and
go.
there we are.
see
Yep,
that.
working.
You know what? I'm just going to keep it right like that. I'm not going to make the screen any bigger.
That's
And
very good.
Okay, perfect.
thank you all. And I just peeked at the time, and I'm going to go quickly. I'm just simply saying, and we all did this before with that deep breath that Reverend Ann suggested that we take. So that, let me just explain that body-oriented psychotherapy is an approach to psychotherapy which applies basic principles of somatic psychology. It originated in the work of Pierre Janet, Sigmund Freud, William Reich, and Alexander Lowen. I've been very, very fortunate in my lifetime to actually be a student of many of these persons. And Alexander Lowen was in New York, and he really talked about the importance of breath and noticing how that feels in your body right now as we all do take that breath. It's a cleansing, normal and natural part of our existence. And it provides the oxygen for our life force. The breath, as pneuma, is also the spirit or the soul. And it was very interesting because when I was doing my research to make sure that besides, if we were in a big room right now, everybody would be standing and doing a different movement with me, but we're relegated to this, which is why I wanted my slides, because I'm a visual person and kinesthetic. And so I wanted there to be more than just me sitting and talking. So I appreciate your patience with me. So, I'm letting you, those of you who are wanting to read this, to see that the unconscious is what is always operating and always teaching us much more about ourselves. And so breathing is a dominant factor and in yoga, and it is simply because The breath brings all of ourselves into existence. Other body pioneers, people like Marion Chase, who was the founder of dance and movement therapy, which is a therapeutic use of movement in dance to support intellectual, emotional, and motor functions of the body. And having been a dance therapist and worked in psychiatric hospitals and hospice, working with developmentally disabled little kids, having the opportunity to share, even in convalescent and nursing homes, and watching the person's aches and pains, if you will, of their heart, being able to reclaim the expression and feel new possibilities that can happen, so that the body is reflecting the traumatic experience at all times. We're sitting here and you could feel if your shoulders are tense. We're sitting here and you can feel if your eyes are starting even to get fatigued, which happens when we're watching a screen all day long. So there isn't any part of our body that isn't reflecting the traumatic experiences of our lifetime, the repetition of them. I also was fortunate enough to study with Moshe Feldenkrais, and that's another person that I highly recommend, that if you want to explore mind-body oriented psychotherapies, that you look at that you see how the connection of the mind and body is central to being able to free one of pain. And the emotional pain is always felt in the body. The state of our emotional wellness and internal harmony can show up directly in how we use our muscles. And conversely, it can affect our emotional state through movement. So it is a elevator going up and down. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? When you're feeling pain or tension in the musculature, we can be sure that that pain and tension is happening within our thoughts and our emotions. And conversely, if we're having a lot of tension, this whole thing for me, I'm like a living example. When this thing didn't work, I literally couldn't breathe, and I literally had memories of personal trauma. And it's okay for a little self-disclosure of always thinking that I didn't have a brain. Something very much like from The Wizard of Oz. Who didn't have the brain? The scarecrow, right? And as soon as I started fumbling with this, my entire body tensed up, almost as if I was in the second grade again, and somebody telling me I got it wrong again and again. So Dr. Bratt talked about positive intentions of how we can release these old, deep feelings. And my positive intention with my constantly not feeling like I had a brain led me to dance and led me to continually learn more and more about this connection between emotion and the brain. Feldenkrais taught that nothing is permanent about our behavior and patterns, except one's belief that they are permanent. So we often believe, consciously or unconsciously, that we only have one way to act. And from that belief, we form habitual responses, which means that we do things largely without awareness. And what we are doing, we're not even conscious of. So the new ability to be able to slow down and make non-habitual choices to other situations in life, such as faced with emotionally charged situations. So in our chairs right now, I would just like everybody to take a moment and see how the mind-body connection works instantly. I'd like you all to clasp your hands. You thought I was going to put you in a trance, Reverend John, later. Okay, so we have this gesture, and we've done this a lifetime. We've folded our fingers, interlocked our hands for a variety of reasons. I remember in first grade when we finished an assignment, we put our hands in front with our hands crossed, and then the teacher was able to give us a gold star. What I'd like you to do right now is relax your hands. And then I want you to interlock them again, but this time I'd like you to interlock them where you move every finger over one space. Make sure that every finger is next to another, not two in the same slot. You with me? Good. Now comes the question. And if Matthew, if you want to unmute everybody for just one split second, I'm going to ask you, how does this feel? We're doing it where we've interlocked our fingers in a different way. So just shout out, what does it feel? I just did this in the last hour in another workshop, and I got answers, which were
Less tense.
less tense,
Awkward.
Awkward.
Wonderful.
uncomfortable, weird.
Weird.
Somebody said, I hate it. They were just so, okay. And now I'd like you to unlock your fingers. Thank you, Matthew. I'd like you to unlock your fingers and go back to what you're used to.
Sorry, I muted you, so you just have to unmute. Mary.
My husband.
Thanks.
That's
Sorry
fine.
about that.
Mary is fine, and my husband would love to have that button. I tell you right now, that would be a gift. So what we just did, let's just go over it really quick. Go to the one you're used to. Thank you. And now go to the one where you're moving every finger over one space. And the words that came out of your mouth were awkward and uncomfortable and hating it and really feeling disoriented. And now go back to the one that you used to, and there's almost like a breath with it. And the reason is because we are creatures of habit. And what happens is if something changes in the body, it affects our thinking. It affects how we articulate and have relationships with others. So Feldenkrais challenged his students to always look at doing things a little different way and watch how that moves through the body. It's a wonderful way of learning, not book knowledge, but more Socratic adventure to know yourself. And as soon as I talked about a Socratic adventure, I want to again go back to our modern psychoanalysis, which draws on an emotional communication, providing an environment where patients feel able to just be as they are and heal through telling the story of their life. And so the Feldenkrais method, Milton H. Erickson, and hypnotherapy, self-relations therapy, all of these ways of developing I like to use the expression, an elevator going up and down. When you're communicating emotionally, shifts happen in the brain, shifts happen in the body. And that's what is the benefit, I highly believe, in modern psychoanalysis. Let's see where we are. So I mentioned Stephen Gilligan a moment ago, and the concept of somatic connection and the wounds that trauma holds in the body, and allowing us to connect to a felt sense. It's a combination of looking at the trauma fields that surround us in everyday life and finding ways through community to heal. Through community, that is what is essential. And that's what we're doing here right now. Of course, many of you know of the work of Basil Mandelkoch, who is a man, a doctor of psychiatry, who really concentrated on body-centered activities to be able to allow us to combine the work of our full restoring connection between our bodies and our minds. I'm checking the time and therefore I'm just going forward to the slides, if that's okay. So where in your body do you feel and hold trauma? And all of you right now could just answer that question: your back, your neck, the headaches, carpal tunnel, variety of ways that we hold on. Is this picture just heartbreaking? Because this little child had a trauma early on in his life, as Dr. Brown talked about, with neglect. Parents who were drug users, parents who worked 24/7. We're not talking about negative, on purpose, negative intention. But look what we're doing now. Our kids are home, well, not all of them, but kids are home doing work on school, parent in that room working on their computer, parent in this room working, and the child is being neglected. He's not unloved, he's just being neglected. Feeding a baby, and the bottle is being held, and the parent has the gaze, and the two of them are so connected with each other, and the phone rings, and the mother turns her head away. In that moment, the child experiences abandonment. And that is also part of the trauma that goes on unconsciously and can stay with us for a lifetime. So as a child, your body was violated, sexualized. You were taught that intimacy is a weapon to be used against you, a way to steal things from you that you didn't even realize could be taken at such a young age. It is normal if your body responds before your mind understands. And that's the key here is that the trauma is nonverbal. Trauma happens to our bodies before we have cognition of what's going on, so that I'll use the word it attacks us. And so we find that it's normal that we get tense, we get angry, we get scared, or we pull away. And it's normal if we cannot trust, and that is another effect, to find safety in the intimacy of our lives. One of the ways that I have personally worked with my patients with trauma is that over the last 30 years, I've seen patients and listening to their traumatic challenges, and often to release my own tensions after the session and move through the vicarious trauma that Dr. Brad talked about. I would write poems to soothe my soul. And the accompanying art for my poems is by Dr. Abby Miller, a dear colleague and friend. And she and I have collaborated in a soon to be released book with my poetry and her beautiful demonstration of impromptu art. So I'd like to quickly read this one. It's called Left Naked. Exposed, hurt, cut open, left naked. She walks a path of fire. There is pain, even in the mere act of taking one step. Hurt beyond measure, amongst lies and secrets. How will she be sheltered from this lightning storm? The thunder is deafening. What cannot be heard remained silenced. The winds of truth bring damage, pieces of a heart broken open. Each charge cuts through, shattered her second skin. Bring her the prayer shawl. Let her sit. It will give her soothing, calming, and nurturing energy to her flesh and bones. The meditation shawl shall offer her protection, off opening chakras, creating a place of shelter, peace, and spiritual sustenance. Let her sit, no longer naked. Sit under her comfort shawl, wrapped in clarity. This shawl is not ordinary, nor is she. Lest we forget her bountifulness. She has been the giver of succor. Now, let her heart be enriched through the presence of a talent. Her aura once more radiates all her beauty. Because I'm paying attention to the time, I'm just going to go through the slides so that you get a little bit of an understanding of how I have witnessed in my own life how trauma shows up in the adult after the child has been triggered by even the smallest things. I have other poems, and I was about to read more of them, and I'm really being mindful of the time. So I could tell you all that these will be available when our book comes out, but it just the piece of art there is a demonstration of the difficulty that is when words are not enough. The people who would come to the pain alleviation center and the pain program at St. Clair's, finding to be able to trust after you've been violated in any way, whether it's a car accident or being beaten by a spouse or being neglected as a child, you develop a very strong hypervigilance, as Dr. Bratt said, and you really don't want to let anybody in. You've got to protect yourself. Another one of my poems. When you have an invisible illness, it's hard to explain to someone who doesn't have a clue. It's a daily struggle being in pain or feeling sick on the inside when you look fine on the outside. So I know that Dr. Bratt on our fourth in the series will be talking about resilience. And so I just wanted to put up the my wheel of ways in which you can nurture yourself and the things that we need to do almost on a daily basis, and some of us on an hourly basis. Just asking this question, where is my breath now? Where is my breath? And how often when we ask that question, typically someone will say, I wasn't breathing. And that stops the flow of positive energy. So that's a beautiful quote by Helen Keller that says, what I am looking for is not out there. It is in me. This says it by itself. When the Japanese men broke in objects, they aggrandize the damage by filling the cracks with gold. They believe that when something suffered damage and has a history, it becomes more beautiful. So we are living in a world of trauma day in and day out right now, all of us. It's impossible to escape it. My 10 o'clock patient called me and said, I need to cancel our appointment. And it was like, what's happening? They were on a vacation. The mother, the father, and 2 children, and the grandmother. They returned, and now the father has COVID. Very bad. So it's like a daily happening that there are breaks in our world. And it really takes sustenance. It really takes our ability to return to self, return to your body. And here is my last slide, which basically says it all. Don't go back to sleep. No matter how horrible your traumas have been. And I know that those of you out there have suffered greatly. No matter how difficult your times have been, we have to remain awake. We have to remain connected to one another. That makes all the difference in the world. This is a repeat of slide number 1. I've added my email address for those of you who might like to reach me. And just grateful to be a part of ACAP, to be a part of this series. I thank you all very much for your time and your patience with the difficulties we had. So I am going to stop sharing.
There we go.
Come back to all of you, and thank you again.
Oh, Mary, thank you. It was so deeply meaningful and insightful, and I know brought up a lot of questions and thoughts, I'm sure, from the folks who are here. And as we know, sometimes it's hard to articulate exactly, what it is that has been brought up for us. But this would be a time, if you have something that particularly you'd like Mary to address, or just something that you'd like to share, if you would put it in the chat, and you can just have it, to everyone in the chat, and I'll read the question, and Mary can answer. And we know that sometimes it's hard to put people on the spot to speak, so please don't think you'll need to do that. But if anybody has anything they'd like to ask, or anything that she spoke about that you want a little more clarity on, that would be just fine. And Matthew, if you want to, you can unspotlight Mary, and then folks can be on gallery view or speaker view if they want to see who's speaking. And we can feel a little bit more like a community. As Mary brought up, that's such an important part of what we're doing, using technology as best we can. But certainly, even tonight, all of us here came together for a reason, to see what this conversation would be like, most likely because we are carrying trauma ourselves. And so we, being together in community at one time, even across the miles and in our different places, is really meaningful. It really does matter. So if anyone has any question they'd like to type in, now would be a great time to do it.
Michael is raising his hand.
Michael, please remember to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. We covered both how much of a struggle it is, but also a lot of hope and a lot of things to make me hopeful and make everyone hopeful. My question for you, Dr. Massaro, is could you talk a little bit about what happens to the body or mind as far as trauma when one is experiencing an anxiety flare-up or a panic attack?
Actually, I was going to ask you if you would be willing to describe what happens to you when you're experiencing anxiety and then a panic attack, because nobody knows better this answer than you do, Michael. So I'm just curious. I'll be happy to, but you know what happens to you, and it's individual for everybody. So would that be okay? Am I putting you on the spot?
I'd be comfortable doing that. I'll do it briefly, of course.
Thank you.
So I do experience anxiety flare-ups, and I become very, very sensitive, reacting very much to any sound I hear anywhere in the environment. It could be a normal sound, but it bothers me. Become paranoid, which relates to my mental illness. I get racing, intrusive and bad thoughts, inappropriate thoughts that I can't seem to stop too quickly. They just race from one thought to the next. I feel a little disoriented, so that gives you a picture.
Perfect explanation and description. And I think that others in the room would probably agree that when they're experiencing anxiety, you cannot think straight. So your question about what happens is a dysregulation in the synapses of the brain. The information is being tangled up. And so you can't think straight, just as you said, and you are disoriented. You keep looping, perseverating on things, which is, unfortunately, part of the panic attack. And so I think that the way in which you talked about being hopeful is not to forget that the panic attack happens and then it stops. And so that there's a beginning and an end. And if you can allow yourself to recognize that, we call one technique of thought stopping, where you actually get up and go and look in the mirror at yourself and be able to stand in reality for that moment. But it's a terrible reaction to traumatic events, to find yourself breathless and find yourself moving through the difficulties of being able to even think straight. And the paranoia, all of it is that part of the body mind that becomes so tense. So, I would encourage movement. I would encourage you to use your body to close your mind and open your body. So you could try some of the Feldenkrais techniques that I mentioned, and you can allow yourself to know that deep breathing practice, by the way, prior to any panic attack. When you have a understanding of your body and more self-regulatory skills, we used to do biofeedback with patients many years ago in a pain management program. And the idea of practicing how to shift the thoughts, how to relax the body, how to regulate even blood flow, so that when you get a panic attack, you can actually plug into the practice. It's pretty impossible if you're not doing something like that on a regular basis to just say, stop it. So, that's my recommendation to you, is the self-regulatory skills that can come through meditation, that can come through movement, Tai Chi, that can come through ways to build resilience in the body. When the panic attack happens, that you're able to use that same skill at a time of anxiety.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I see Lisa Marie, you have your hand up too. Please feel free to unmute yourself and share your question or thought.
Thank you. It's just easier than typing.
Yeah,
Um,
we get
I
to
just-
see your face.
I wanted to ask Dr. Massaro, you talked about deep breathing, you talked about Feldenkrais technique, and my own experience was after after physically traumatic events, I found myself having difficulty staying present in my body. And uh, because I felt like my body was not a safe space to be in. And it really took me many years to get consistent with sort of being present in my physical vehicle subsequent to that. And I was just wondering if there was any particular type of body work or outside of Feldenkrais movement techniques or any other types of complementary therapies that you find particularly useful for helping uh, people to remain present in
Yes.
and engaged in the five senses reality of living in a body.
Thank you, Lisa, for your question. I was working so hard to make this a 40-minute clip. And, you know, years and years and years of lifetime of mind-body intervention. So I didn't talk about Ida Rolf and Rolfing. Are you familiar with Rolfing? Rolfing, Ida Rolf devised these ways of working body work, it's body work, and to help to release the tensions within the musculature. And practitioner of Rolfing, structural integration, usually when we begin to feel tension and lack of presence in the body, there's a void, there's a hollow, and we cannot access that. And so having a Rolfing practitioner, that could be, I mean, it's a very deep, deep tissue massage, but it wakes up these places. So I tell you a quick story. In my travels of understanding my body and working with others, I went through, usually Rolfing is, they give you 10 weeks of intervention. You go once a week and they work on various sections of the body each time you go. It's not like a full body massage. They could just be working on your feet for that hour. The next time you go there, you could be working on the thoracic section. So this is the day I was there and he was working on around my rib cage. And he would palpate on my right side and be able to go deep and under the ribs. And it's quite intense. But the release of the fascia and the release of the ways in which the body closes down, it just basically, that's why you feel like it's not there, because it's shutting down. And he's working and he's working and he moves over to my left side and he cannot put his hand, do it like this, like a depth. He couldn't get anywhere. And he'd move back to the right, fine. He'd move back to the left and I started to weep, which is also part of the idea of holding the emotion so deeply in the body that it shows up in a moment's time. And I'm crying. And he says, just use your words. So that all the body-oriented psychotherapies work with both the cognition, the feeling states, and the body. And I was crying terribly, and he's working and working. And all of a sudden I said, I can't let you in there. My heart is broken. My rib cage was protecting it. And so if he was going to palpate and get in there, I might have felt like I was going to fall apart. And as I cried and as I spoke, and he was so gentle and tender, all of a sudden I heard myself say out loud, nobody can break my heart but me. And there was this sense of ownership of my emotional state. You know, when they say sometimes no one makes you feel that way, you know, that kind of comment. I don't like it, but it's true. It's true in that if my body is protected by me, I'm okay. So I recommend something on those lines. For years, I did body work and psychotherapy. I don't do it anymore. Now I just sit on my ass. Excuse me. It came with the gray hair. It used to be all over the floor on my knees. Enough of that. Anyway, thank you, Lisa. I hope I answered your question for now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I know we're going just a skosh over time, but I just like to offer if there maybe one last, if anyone has one last question. Little hand raised doohickey, and I'll be sure to be looking at it. And if not, that's okay too. As both Mary and Pat have done, they've let folks know how to get a hold of them, what ACAP offers, the various programs there. And if this has lifted up within you the desire to explore further any sources of help for trauma, Allison Rogers has typed in The Body Keeps Score. I know that book, and Waking the Tiger are
Yes.
wonderful resources for learning more about body and trauma.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for putting that in there, Allison. I'm familiar with those books as well, and know that they're very, very powerful. If you go to the ACAP website, I think folks will be able to see a variety of things that you offer. And it can just be a starting point, right, for where folks might be able to go to find additional resources and
We're
connections.
having a wonderful conference, a virtual conference on Saturday, and it is about belonging. And Pat, I don't know if you want to say one thing about it, but the filmmaker, James Christie, there will be clips of that. He is a parent of an autistic child, and our program, I Strive, which is on Saturdays, works with adults who have aged out of the services for autistic persons. And then another young man who, Kerry, I can't remember his last name right this moment, but the bottom line is if you're interested, go on our website and join us. It will be a day of great information and learning that really touches the heart.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I encourage everyone at this point to put your screens on gallery view and unmute yourselves. And would we please express our appreciation for Mary and for Pat with some FCC applause and love for them for all that they have shared this evening. We are so grateful. Yes, if you're able to show your faces, that would be fun too. So we can, see each other and feel a little bit of that we have here. I'm now going to turn it over to Reverend John to close us out with a few remarks about what's happening next week, and then to close us in prayer.
All right. Thank you so much again, Dr. Massaro, blessing us, body, mind, and soul. Just want to ask and invite everyone to come and join us next week, Wednesday, March 3rd, as we will explore racism and trauma with Reverend Dr. Glenn Bembry and Reverend Dr. Willard Ashley, two incredible scholars and pastors. It will be a real blessing. So please mark your calendars. We would love to see you there. So now, let us take a moment and please mute yourself so that we can return to the
John, I think you're on mute.
You're muted.
okay. I was deep in my meditation, and I invite you all to join me as we return to the center of the circle and take a deep breath in and connect with your breath. the prana, the ruach, the breath of life, and be reminded of the miracle, the simple miracle of being alive. And take a moment to acknowledge our bodies and to thank them for the deep wisdom that they hold. And take a moment to internally give a prayer of gratitude for our teacher, Dr. Massaro, for the healing journey that she has guided us through. Take a moment to internally acknowledge and thank all the companions on that journey, everyone on this Zoom call, for their humanity, courage, and vulnerability. And in this time, let us give thanks to God, the giver of life, the giver of healing, the giver of breath, the giver of spirit. May we never lose the connection that heals, restores, and sustains us. In your many names we pray. Amen.
Thank you all so much for being a part of this. And we hope we will see you again next week. Meanwhile, Dr. Bratt and Dr. Massaro, I feel like our congregation has made a wonderful friend in both of you and feel very connected to you both and grateful. And we hope that, I know with Patricia, we're going to be continuing to have her as a part of this series. But Mary, again, thank you so much. You are a busy person and do so much for so many, and you made time for us, and we are grateful. Thank you. Thank you. So good night, everyone. And we'll see you on the worship on Sunday. Please do join for the Facebook Live before and the Zoom coffee hour after, because we miss each other. And we hope to see you next week on this program. So thank you again. Have a beautiful evening, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
And thank you, Matthew, once again, for being our man behind the curtain.
Zoom tech.
Really appreciate it. Matthew gave me a prompt about recording it just as Dr. Bratt began. So we started with that piece. We didn't get the early introduction or the song. Sure to do that next week. I've got to remember, hit that record button. So I'm going to stop the recording now. And let's see, let me get there. And we hope to be able to have this up on our website within a day or two.
And Dr.